I want you to imagine a spectrum. And on one extreme of this spectrum, we're going to have drawing. And we're going to have drawing that focuses heavily on line work. Now, on the other extreme of this spectrum, we're going to have sculpting, but we're going to have deductive sculpting. So, anything that's like carving, chiseling. Right in the middle, we're going to have painting. Now, in between painting and drawing, we're going to have a bunch of disciplines and techniques. So let's say that a quarter from drawing to painting, we're going to have charcoal drawing, which still focuses on line work, but it's looser and much more painterly than, say, working with a pencil. And on the other side, from sculpting to painting, about a quarter way in, we're going to have terracotta sculpting, which you still carve in it, but you're also adding material and plastering, similar to painting. Now, the two techniques that I'm going to be talking about today, one of them is going to be on the more on the drawing side, and I'm going to put a PD here, I guess, to represent painting like drawing, and the other one is going to have an approach more like sculpting. So I'll put a PS, painting like sculpting. Now, the first demo I'm going to do is going to be painting with the mindset of a draftsman. We'll see how that affects the final product, or how our painting turns out when we think about painting this way. Now, I'm going to focus solely on paint application, so I'm not going to be worried about composition or color or anything like that. We're just focusing on painting technique today, or paint application. And since I'm approaching this painting the way I would a drawing, I started out using lines to basically mark where my orange is, and I'm essentially going to be applying paint the same way I would use a color pencil. So I'm coloring with paint. I've noticed that a lot of novice artists, or artists that are just starting out, tend to approach painting this way, but there are professional artists or famous artists that still use these techniques, like Fernando Botero. He paints the same way one would approach drawing. Even to an extent, Leonardo da Vinci, with his sfumato technique, approached painting this way too. There's nothing wrong with painting this way. It's just one way of seeing the world, and I've noticed that people that approach painting this way tend to be very literal, whereas people that approach painting like a sculpture will have more of an abstract mindset, or see things more abstractly. Now, you can see I'm using small brushes. Most of the brushes I'm using are roughly the same size. I'll switch brushes depending on if I'm applying dark paint or light paint, just so I don't get them dirty, and it saves time. I'm also timing myself. I set a 20-minute time limit for each demo, just to keep all the variables as consistent as I could. So I'm using same size panel, same still life, same palette. Essentially, the only thing that's changing is the size of the brushes and the mindset. Now, in this particular demo, anytime I'm working where the lights and the darks meet, I'm just gonna feather in the in-between tone. So right where the shadow starts to turn and becomes a light, that area I'm just gonna feather it in, as well as any area that I want to soften, or that needs to transition. I'm essentially just gonna be feather it in. Now, I typically don't work this way, but I want to stay as true to this approach of painting as I possibly can, because I almost want to exaggerate the approach, so you guys understand exactly what I'm talking about when I say one technique has a mindset of a draftsman and the other one the mindset of a sculptor. Now, even though I'm working on a still life here, I'm painting in orange. This applies to any subject matter, including figures or landscapes. So, say someone that would approach a figure this way, let's say they were going to paint the hands, what you might see them do is they'll outline the outside of the fingers and outline the outline of the hands and every single finger, and then go in and color every part of it and blend the shadows with the lights and approach it that way. Now, applying paint this way does have a number of drawbacks, and I think the biggest issue I have with this technique is that when you approach painting this way, paintings tend to come out a little bit mechanical looking. They don't seem to flow as much as, say, approaching it like a sculptor. Even if I come in at the end with a big brush and feather everything out and soften it, it still feels a little stiff. Now, the next technique we're going to be working on is painting like a sculpture, and I have a bias towards this. This is probably my favorite way of painting. So right off the bat, I'm just going to be really aggressive with it. I'm using a big brush, and I'm really thinking volume, not lines. I'm looking at masses. I'm looking at shapes. I'm not worried about any edges or any lines at this point. And I'll make the orange bigger. It doesn't matter if it's the right size in the beginning, because I could always, use the paint that I'm going to use in the background to carve the orange to the size that it should be. And this is why this is looked at more as, or this is one of the reasons why this is looked at more of a painting technique that leans towards sculpting. This is the technique that you'll typically think about when you hear, alla prima, this sort of broad brushstroke, this bravura, aggressive style of painting. And it'll give the illusion that the painting is done, very quickly and effortlessly. But like I said before, I timed each demo to be exactly 20 minutes. So it's gonna take me the same amount of time to do this painting as I did the other one. What you will see is that I use less brush strokes here. So even though it looks like I'm just whipping paint in and everything's happening very quickly, it's actually not. It's the opposite. I'm more deliberate with my brush strokes. I'm taking my time and I'm thinking ahead. So you almost have to imagine what the brushstroke would look like on the canvas before you put it in there. So you have to have a lot more discipline to paint this way, because every brushstroke counts. The other way of painting, you're almost just mindlessly brushing. It's almost like sweeping a floor. Artists that use this technique, that work in this way, are artists like Richard Schmidt, or some of the past artists like Cecilia Bow, or John Singer Sargent, or Emile Gruppe. This is a very elegant way of approaching painting, and you have to have a certain level of confidence to be able to just plaster paint on your canvas. Like I said, you're approaching this painting like a sculpture. You're carving, you're plastering. You'll see me in a bit. I'll use a palette knife. Every single brush stroke is thought about ahead of time. I'm not just, going back and forth, just mindlessly just brushing paint back and forth. Now, another difference between this technique and the other technique that I showed you earlier is that when I have a transition between light and dark, instead of feathering in, the edge, what I'll do is I'll actually apply another brush stroke. So I have one dark area, one light area, and then I have another tone that I put in between, but it's not feathered in, it's painted in. These paintings, for some reason, have an ability to have a psychological hold on the viewer. It's almost like staring at clouds. You know how when you look up in the sky and you see clouds and they have one shape and then it looks like something else? The same thing happens when you see paintings that are done this way. And what you'll find is that when you look at it up close, it looks one way, and then you step back and it looks different. So I put the two paintings here side by side so you guys could compare and see what the final product of each technique is.